Hey, my name is Carolina Lopez and I'm in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Today is Wednesday, February 17 of 2021, and I'm interviewing Alex Berkley from Buffalo, New York for the oral history project titled COVID-19 Teacher Poets Writing to Bridge the Distance, which will be archived by the Oklahoma State University Oral History Research Program. So hello, Alex.
Hi.
So can we start by asking you to introduce yourself and
Sure.
tell me about how you became an educator?
Sure. My name's Alex Berkley. I'm a special ed teacher at Pioneer High School. I work with a self-contained 12.1 life skills class. And I've been high school and I did middle school for a while for about 6 years at Pioneer High School. It's outside of Buffalo. I got into education. I actually was a music major in college and singer-songwriter for a while. And then I started substitute teaching at a high school and actually an elementary school with students with autism. And I really enjoyed working with them. I had worked with people with disabilities for a long time. And just decided that I could use my musical abilities by teaching as well, even though I'm not a music teacher, but it still comes in handy as teaching kids with disabilities.
That's great. So can you talk a little bit about your school context?
I'm sorry.
Can you talk a little bit more about your school context?
Sure. My school is in a rural area. It is a pretty poor district. Definitely primarily white student population. The thing that was most relevant about when COVID closed the schools was we found out how little technology and internet access most of the students had. And so it was a struggle, especially I think in special ed, you might see a higher rate of poverty. And it ended up being a big struggle trying to connect with my students who did not have internet access or did not have devices. And it took several weeks for my school to provide laptops to all the students, but eventually they did that, and that certainly helped a lot.
So since we are here to document the impact of COVID-19 on educators and education, going back to spring 2020, how did you learn that teachers will be teaching remotely or that school buildings will be closing? Do you remember a specific moment?
Yeah, I remember we had a staff meeting. I believe it was Thursday, and the principal was going over different ways where we can sanitize desks, and how if there was one case, then we would be shutting down. But a lot of precautions that seemed like not nearly enough. And staff members were clearly very skeptical about all that. But it was on my drive home, I think that same day, that I heard on NPR that Ohio was shutting down all of its schools. And when I heard that an entire state was shutting down its schools, I figured it was only a matter of time before we would be. And it took them until Sunday night, pretty late, to tell us that we were going to be closed, but they told us we'd be closed until I think April 20th. So we had a target date of when we'd be going back, which in retrospect seems kind of ridiculous because of how long that the closure actually lasted. We're back. We came back in September to in-person learning, but very drastically different than it was back then.
Okay. So how did you respond? Did your teaching practices change in different ways, or how do you think everything happened?
Yeah. For our district, the directive was to give one assignment for each subject per week. And it took a couple weeks to even get that going, since myself included, much of the staff did not have access to printers. And so staff had to come into the school like I got a bunch of PDF files together for my students and sent them to the secretary staff. And they actually had to go in person to make copies of all those and organize them into envelopes. And school buses came and dropped them off to all the students who needed them. Quite the ordeal. But for my own instruction, for the kids I work with, they need repeated practice every single day. So giving one assignment per week was just obviously not sufficient. So it was always kind of a balancing act from March until June, where I was trying to figure out what was too much to send home and what wasn't enough. And then the amount of contact that I had with the kids was clearly not enough either. I tried, when Zoom became widely used almost immediately, I tried doing weekly meetings at first to get the kids involved. And not many of them were able to do it, or they had to drive to the school parking lot to use that Wi-Fi. But then I tried upping the Zoom meetings to 3 times a week, and I realized that we didn't actually need to be meeting that many times. It was just mostly, my kids work on social skills a lot. And since they were so far away from their friends, most of what I was trying to do was keep them in touch with each other and keep them conversing in appropriate kind of ways, which again, over the internet, it's obviously a lot different than it is in person. But yeah, like I said, it was just a balancing act. And by the end, I think I had finally gotten my footing in June. Just a little too late.
Thank you. Around the same time as schools were built, closing, the National Poetry Month began. So you and along with other educators participated in writing a poem every day, right?
Right.
So can you talk about writing poetry during the pandemic?
Sure. Writing has always been something that was really meaningful to me. I have written songs for most of my life, and poetry kind of couples with that. So I found myself writing a lot more with the amount of extra time I had. Typically, I have a 45-minute commute to work both ways. And so I had a lot of extra time to do more writing. And I had participated in some of the 5-day writing challenges before on the website. And when I happened to be on April 1st and saw that the challenge was opening up, I thought this is a really good opportunity to practice poetry and write in different ways and with different prompts than I had ever used before. So I think it really helped me to expand my ability to write during the course of that month. Not to mention, it helped a lot with dealing with the crisis that was going on.
Yeah, that's great. Can you share a poem that you wrote in the early days of the pandemic? Do you have?
Sure.
Thanks.
This is the first one that I wrote for day one, called Spring Credo. Happiness is easy, like the still weeds we saw standing in a pond that looked like green jello. the geese with their feet in the air, fishing under a sun that seemed to be hurtling towards the surface. If I hear nothing but your laughter and our puppy's snores for the rest of my life, I'll miss music for sure, but I guess I'd be okay. We walked back on a muddy path with our baby son on your back, deer watching with placid fear. The humans here are okay, they say, except maybe that guy on the bench who has the mild look of a serial killer. But perhaps we're stereotyping, and he's probably a fine guy, just enjoying the sunshine.
Thank you. As you read this poem, do you notice something new or what do you recall?
Like most of the poems that I was writing, they involved my son, who was just over a year old and still, very much in his baby stage. So rereading the poems now with him, he's almost 2. It's fun. It's almost like looking at old photos of him and getting a sense of what our time was like back then. But it's pretty, sort of based in reality. The poem is just a snapshot of a day where we were walking through my wife and I and our son were walking through a nature preserve, and saw things like geese fishing and deer watching us, and a stranger who kind of looked like a serial killer. So that's where that came from. But so yeah, the main thing that strikes me is it's just reliving the many walks that we took to pass the time, as most of our other options were closed.
As you mentioned earlier, poetry helped you with like to go through the pandemic. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, the connection paused for a moment. I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
I think it's going now. Yeah, I didn't hear any of the question. I'm sorry.
Don't worry. I asked you, as you mentioned earlier, writing poetry helped you to go through the pandemic. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I the the main thing I think that was a source of frustration at the beginning of the pandemic was how strange it was for my job of teaching, and trying to get the students engaged and getting materials out, and communicating with parents, and all the expectations we had that didn't seem entirely possible at the time. I think I was lucky to be in a district that was pretty lenient about what we were actually expected to accomplish. And the main goal was to make sure that the students were being provided for socially, emotionally, and being fed by the cafeteria. So personally, I think one of the biggest struggles was not being able to see family and friends and do all the normal things that we would do on a weekend. Again, my son comes into this because I think we were just getting to a point where we really wanted to get him together with other kids and socialize them, and we really suddenly couldn't do that. And I think over the course of the year, it kind of shows he's a little afraid of other kids and being around people. And it probably had a lot to do with the fact that we were staying inside, indoors, and trying not to get into contact with other people. And so I think more of my struggle with COVID comes now, a year or almost a year after. But at the time writing, I think writing, I mean, it gave me a creative purpose, and definitely just internally, the lack of any kind of satisfaction with my job at the time came totally from writing during that month.
So would you like to share a poem, another poem right now?
Sure.
We have one that talks about your child or any memory.
Yeah. This is called Blue Eyes. You have blue eyes, clearly from your mother, since my eyes are brown. And I always thought everyone in my family had brown eyes until you were born. And my mom pointed out my dad's eyes are bright blue too. Sometimes in the mornings, you look at me from your crib with narrowed eyes and a furrowed brow. You look so grumpy to be waking up. But it's like, kid, it's not even 6 a.m. And your mama and I have no problem with you staying asleep for another hour. But those blue eyes are piercing. They remind me of my dad in old black and white photos from the 60s, when he was relatively new too. When your eyes laugh, it is your mama's laughter echoing across a canyon of time. I don't see me yet, but I don't need to. You are everyone I love.
That's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you recall now, or is there something that you think, or what do you think now that you read it again?
Again, it immediately brings the image of walking into my son's bedroom when he's waking up and him having this angry look on his face about being awake. He still sometimes has that same kind of look, but now he's a little bit more, he can be a little bit more funny or understand what's going on a little bit better. But that one obviously doesn't really have anything to do with the pandemic as much as the positives of the school shutdown was that I got to spend so much more time with him than I ever would have. And so that poem definitely makes me think about that, all that special extra time that we got.
Great. So what changes did you experience in your relationship with students, families, and colleagues, if any?
I would say my relationships with parents actually grew stronger. I was calling them almost on a daily basis, or they were calling me. And I think everybody understood what the situation was. And so in some parents who had been difficult during the school year, I was pretty brand new in the classroom that I had been teaching in. And so these with the population I was in, I had worked with 15 to 1 ELA students before. So I was kind of taking a step up in severity of disabilities. And these parents could sometimes be have pretty high expectations of what I was going to be able to do in my first year in that position. But as soon as the pandemic hit, and me being in the city, and this was more of the epicenter of what was going of cases spreading and deaths. They were pretty sympathetic and patient with everything I was doing, and just grateful actually for what I was able to get done. I think I continued to try to have as high expectations of the students as I possibly could, given the situation. And I think the parents got a good view of the challenges of a day in the life of a teacher. And they this year it has continued on. Now that we're back in the classroom, they're still much more grateful seeming than they were before. With students, I think I I didn't really get a chance to know what the change in my relationship with students would be like until we were back in the classroom in September. And I think it's amazing to me how willing they are to wear masks all day, how willing they are to stay socially distant from their friends. Even, I have kids with autism who maybe don't have as strong of an understanding, but they do have a basic understanding that COVID can mean really devastating consequences. And so their respect for the classroom expectations and rules is it's really amazing.
That's awesome. So is there anything that you will go back and change if you could?
I I don't know if there's anything I could have done much differently, but I would have probably pushed for more technology in the classroom to begin with. I know that would have been a tough sell pre-pandemic, but now every student has their own personal laptop, so it clearly, could have been done. But I do think in the weeks leading up to the pandemic, well, I probably undersold to my students the severity, but I had no idea it was going to be as bad as it was. So I wasn't expecting, obviously, the school to shut down, and I told the students they had nothing really to worry about until we got to March. But yeah, if there was one thing I could have done differently, teaching them how to use the technology to communicate from greater distances would have been the main thing, which is exactly what I did in September. And our school did get shut down for 2 more weeks in November. And when it did, my kids were unbelievably prepared this time. And they got on, they did their daily work, they logged on for Zoom meetings. It was amazing, the difference. So yeah, the main difference, preemptive training in technology would have been a big difference back in February or March of last year.
Okay. So do you have any aha moments or silver linings from this experience?
Well, yeah, just recently, right? We're on February break right now, but right before the break started, I was talking to a school psychologist about some of my students, and he made the comment that isn't it amazing? This year, the kids with autism are actually behaving better than they were last year, and I think a big takeaway is that when technology is super motivating to kids with disabilities, and they should have had their own personal laptops before this thing started, so that's probably all I got.
It's really great.
Thanks.
So would you like to share another poem? Do you have something like by the end of the pandemic, or any one that you would like to share?
Sure. This is the last one I wrote for the April challenge, called Pushing a Stroller. Pushing a stroller in the aftermath of a rainy day paints a little portrait of the zeitgeist. The runners who curve onto the road, keeping 6 feet distance, the angry bald man with a mask hanging round his neck and black knee socks reaching to his shorts, yelling at a barking dog through somebody's window. The park so beautiful and green, dotted yellow with dandelions, kids rapping while riding bikes, making weird eye contact through windshields, expressions masked. And we walk the loop around the perimeter, and there's an old man smoking and eating a sandwich. There are people walking dogs, couples holding hands. Before you know it, there's actually some blue in the sky, like Bob Ross just changed his mind about something. I watch Clem stretching in his stroller. It's actually getting hot. I take off his hat and push the stroller home.
Thank you for sharing. So that really reflects on how we see the world now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like things about that with strangers keeping 6 feet distance and people wearing masks that seem a whole lot more normal now than they did when I was writing that.
Yes. So let's turn to now and what's next. So how can you describe your state right now with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Um, well, our schools are open. It's not that way all across the state. The city schools in Buffalo just reopened, and I really don't actually know how it's going there. But the system, I can say, seems to be working. There have been cases within our district. There was one occurrence where they felt the need to shut the school down for 2 weeks. But beyond that, those cases have not spread throughout the district. So overall, though, when we came back in September, I thought this was going to be short-lived. I think we'll be home, within a matter of weeks. They've actually done a really good job of making sure that this worked. One of the big pros is that all the students and staff have their own personal laptops now. And again, I was able to train students and staff in case we did go remote. And when we did, that it was a really smooth transition, basically like a regular school day, except from home. The wearing masks and desks being spread out. I'm a little different because I'm a self-contained special ed classroom. I have all my kids every day. Other general ed classrooms are split up so that students come Monday and Tuesday, and then the next group comes Thursday and Friday, and teachers have Wednesday to do full remote with their students. I had 3 students in my classroom who were learning remote at the beginning of the year, and that's been cut down to 1. 2 of those students are now full-time in the classroom again. So generally speaking, wearing masks and staying distant and washing hands has worked to keep the schools safe and splitting up the student population.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So what about your writing life now? How would you describe it?
I would say that I have not been able to get into the same kind of groove since September, just because teaching is obviously a full-time job, sometimes more than a full-time job. And with all writing and, additional paperwork that they have imposed on us since coming back to school, it's really difficult to do any personal writing. I've focused mainly on writing songs and recording. So that's, and writing songs has definitely taken a backseat to recording old ones that just need a place to go. So yeah, I think that's about it. It's just a lack of time. It's hard to keep going.
Do you think there are any benefits that will come from COVID-19 in understanding literacy teaching and learning for other teachers and students?
It's a good question. I don't really know. I I think something that I learned personally from my district that I liked a lot was that we focused on the social emotional aspect of the students way more than academics when the schools were closed down. And that is something that I think we should really always do. Academics are obviously important, but the social well-being of the kids should for sure come first. I don't know what it's like in Oklahoma, but in New York State, we have a lot of standardized testing that I think most educators would agree is completely unnecessary and just it overloads students with on it whenever those tests roll around, it's really difficult. So focusing more on the social aspect for students is really important.
So, given your experiences, what are the few of the most important issues that you think teachers are facing or have faced?
I think the safety concerns were probably one of the biggest with COVID around. I think specifically in the schools that stayed fully remote, like the Buffalo City schools, teachers had some real valid concerns about going back and feeling safe. I don't know when those safety concerns are going to end. As safe as I feel right now, sometimes I think that maybe I'm feeling too comfortable, in schools. You never know exactly with a disease like this when it's gonna strike. So everyone feels comfortable until they get it or spread it to a loved one or any of that. So safety is going to be the number one issue for probably quite a while, even with the vaccinations going on.
So, do you have any strategic directions for education that you would like to see?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Like, what strategies do you think they will be useful, like from now on?
Oh yeah. I don't know if there's anything new that we could do other than mainly staying masked and keeping distant. All those are the main strategies that I can see as working.
Is there any other poem that you would like to share?
Sure. Well, this one's called Day One, and it's about the beginning of the pandemic, or the very first day when I stayed home. Day one. We sat in the yard on a blanket while Clem crawled around, exploring a uniquely warm March afternoon. The winters can be so long, but when the sun starts to shine, everyone starts to barbecue and play music on old boomboxes in their yards. And everyone starts to drink with a celebratory tone, in stark contrast to our February drinking, which is done purely to beat back the misery of brown snow on the roadside and God's gray middle finger up in the sky. I watched Clem's face as he studied a twig in his fingers, and I thought about Thursday when I stopped at a red light and received a Washington Post update on my phone. Ohio was closing all of their schools. It took until Monday morning for New York to shut down. Karen walked into the backyard with a bag of popcorn and 2 bowls. In true social distancing fashion, she said, handing 1 bowl to Kaylee. We all sipped wine and looked up at a blue sky when I felt my phone buzz again. California issues stay-at-home order in the Bay Area. I felt calm. I texted Sean in San Francisco. I watched Clem crawling faster towards the gate. I felt spring in my lungs, and I tried to understand that this was only the beginning. But to see a beginning in relation to some unknown end through a chasm of time that doesn't even exist yet, well, where do you even begin? I took a handful of popcorn and finished my wine. This was only day one.
Oh, that sounds really powerful.
Thanks.
So do you recall something now that you read it again?
Well, yeah, this memory is just very clear in my mind that we have a tenant, Karen, who lives downstairs, and she came outside to, just drink wine and share popcorn with us. And we thought it was funny that she was putting the popcorn in separate bowls, to be socially distant, which was a term that we were only just learning. And, just not having any idea how much time was going to pass. And yeah, I just kind of remember looking at the spring sky and thinking like, oh, well, it'll be over by April, right? But yeah, it's weird to think back on, knowing that it could possibly just keep going and going and going, and not really having any still no reference of how much time could pass before things feel normal again.
Yes. So is there anything else that you would like to share or say that I didn't ask?
I don't think so. I really appreciate the ethical ELA website and the prompts that they had in April, and throughout the year. It's just a really awesome site to share poetry and read other people's work, and a very supportive environment. So I really appreciate that.
So would you like to share a poem for the closing?
Sure. This one doesn't have a title. Then we walked finally back to real life. Weeks told in headlines. People free to do things. Life to be white noise again. Papers sell like hotcakes today. But I notice eyes searching the sky, waiting for metaphorical asteroids. And that was just one I wrote towards the beginning of April, kind of imagining the end of the pandemic.
So does it look like that right now or different?
Not yet. Hopefully soon.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.